Ladies and gentlemen, we all know that last week the Russian forces moved from Kiev, freeing Kiev from the siege, and have relocated to the east of Ukraine. And this is definitely a win for Ukraine. They've thwarted one of Russia's major objectives, which is the seizure of the capital city. But this does not necessarily mean that the Russians are defeated overall. In fact, moving to the east might just end up being a strategic victory for the Russians, and we're going to break down why. So let's take a look first at this map here showing exactly what we talked about. This is capturing some of the this is movements from the 15th to 21st, obviously set to some very high drama music, but you can see they talk about how the Russian forces from the siege of Kiev have redeployed to the eastern area. This is the Donbas region. This here in the south is Crimea. There is Mariupol, where you can see Mariupol still has some holdouts in the downtown of the city. But by and large, the Russians have withdrawn from Kiev and have focused on the Donbas, Kharkiv, Mariupol, and many of these other areas in eastern Ukraine. So what does this mean for the larger strategic situation, right? They talk a little bit about Russian counterattacks, Putin's decision, and then reversal of that decision to attack the Azovstal steelworks, right? There's obviously a ton going on. But what does this overall mean for Russia, and why? Did they just withdraw so that they could lick their wounds, rebuild? Are they trying to reconcentrate their forces? I think that's definitely part of it. Russia certainly has realized that dividing its forces into three major prongs diluted them too much. And because of the geography, right? Three prongs going into Ukraine meant that the forces couldn't mutually support each other. They had to have three different logistical supply chains, three different command structures, all working separately and requiring their own separate support structures. And that can really drain a military, as we've seen, especially one as poorly organized as it turns out Russia is. Also, because the three prongs are hitting Ukraine, right? Ukraine in the center actually has great command and control because there's three fights, but it's centered in Kiev. And so it means that Ukraine, while their logistics became better, the harder the Russians push, right? It's easy to support three forces as your battlefield gets smaller and smaller. Russia, the deeper they stretched into Ukraine's territory, the harder it becomes to support those offensives. So the idea that Russia has taken its forces and concentrated them in, let's see if we can pull it up here, in this region, right? It means that instead of trying to manage three prongs, three separate logistics chains, there's one, maybe two major logistical supply chains that they have to deal with. And it's just going to be simpler to manage that war. But that's not the primary reason. That's the one most people, most analysts are thinking of. What they are forgetting, and we'll take a look here, is one of the most important facets of this war. One of the things that you have to understand more than anything else, and that is the languages. And more than the languages, the culture that accompanies these regions. As you can see here in this handy map, let's see if we can, there we go, even better. So this is a linguistic map of Ukraine. And as you can see, there's a little bit of Belarusian spoken on the Belarusian border, a little bit of Polish spoken on the Polish border, right? Pretty typical of any country, right? Near their borders with their neighbors, the neighbor's language will become more common. But for the vast majority of central and western Ukraine, the language is Ukrainian. No shocker there. But what's interesting is that the Russian speakers, of course, are scattered all in the east. In fact, people who are linguistically Russian are concentrated almost exclusively in the country's east. And so, in addition to just speaking Russian, right, if you speak Russian, it's going to be easier for you to consume Russian media, to be reached by Russian propaganda efforts, and to identify more with Russia. right? And this is true in a lot of places. Where there's a linguistic connection, cultural connections become easier. It makes perfect sense, right? You can export or import movies, for example, television shows, newspapers. The ease of cultural exchange makes connections really tight among cultures. So logically then, we also see that look at the election results. This is the pre-invasion, I want to say pre-revolution, 2012, maybe 2014 election results for Ukraine. And you can see in 2014, look, the Party of Regions, right, the Russian-backed party, won basically every single district with the exception, look at this, of half of Mariupol, all through this region here, all through the east of the country. And it's clear that not only is it a Russian-speaking area, but it is Russian culturally or Russian politically aligned. And so that means that Russia has moved its troops out of a region where we saw the level of hostility was at an 11 out of 10. We saw the images of Ukrainian farmers, tractors stealing military vehicles. The level of brazen sabotage is absolutely unreal. And it's because the Russians are seen as invaders. They're seen as an other, right? And so when you have that, when you have this foreign invader, this foreign force that's not supposed to be there, where the general population doesn't have a connection with you, resents your presence, well, you're going to encounter a lot of logistical problems. Now, in contrast that, when you have a friendly population that feels like they identify with you, you're going to have things just become so much easier. And this is a great example in Afghanistan, right? We had a population that was pretty hostile. They didn't share a language. We didn't share a religion. There were huge cultural differences. And that meant that for a U.S. military member, you were treated at all times like if you were not on a U.S. controlled base, you had to have a combat ready posture, walking through a village, touring a school, anything. You were in full kit, helmet, assault rifle, Overwatch, 16-man unit, extremely, extremely hostile. And that's a function of the fact that in that region, it's the equivalent. It's not quite the equivalent, but it has a lot of similarities to the experience of being a Russian trying to operate in an area that's primarily Ukrainian. Now, you contrast that with being in a place that welcomes you. A good example would be U.S. forces in Iraqi Kurdistan. The Kurds historically viewed the U.S. as being friends and allies and advocates for the Kurds, and the Kurdish people saw the United States as being a protector of their people. And the U.S. even attempted to protect the Kurds with a no-fly zone in the 90s. And so the difference in the posture you could have in Iraqi Kurdistan, in places like Erbil, U.S. soldiers could drive around in regular vans, not wearing body armor at all, right? But if you were to go to Mosul or Baghdad at the same time, U.S. soldiers would be heavily armored anywhere they went. And it's just a testament to the fact that if you're surrounded by people who broadly, not universally, but broadly support what you're doing and why you're there, you are going to just have a much easier time of taking care of anything, right? You could buy food on the open market and be reasonably certain that it will be safe to eat, right? You can have your unarmored logistics convoys move up and down roads and be reasonably certain they won't be ambushed. Even things like foreign intelligence sources operating in the country are going to have a little bit of a harder time when the general population supports the occupying forces. It's just simple cultural logistics, right? And it's one of the things that I think people don't appreciate about the Russian move to focus their forces on regions and in areas where Russia has support. It's going to make their logistics chains much easier. Soldiers, for example, Russian soldiers will be able to get treated in civilian hospitals in these regions in all likelihood. Russian soldiers will probably have the support of local partisans, local police and firefighters, just so much. Even silly things like train conductors, roadways. These are all things that are much more likely to support Russian invasion forces. You may have heard reports that the Russians had to actually steal Ukrainian cell phones, but the Ukrainians either weren't giving them cell phones, or were damaging their cell towers so that they couldn't be used. You may have heard reports that Ukrainians, again, in the Kiev region, were taking down road signs so the Russians would repeatedly get lost trying to drive down the roads. These are all things that, if they happen in the East, are not going to happen at the same scale. Even before the invasion, when the Ukraine military was fighting a more partisan war in this region, the soldiers would say in interviews, the population doesn't support the Ukrainian military here. They support the Russians. They support the separatists. So all that to say that I think we forget, and we need to remember, that not only is this move of Russia a recognition of their inability to take Kiev, but a recognition of the fact that there is a place in Ukraine that will welcome them, and there are places in Ukraine that are hostile to them. And a hostile population is a strategic liability, and a helpful population is a strategic asset. And Russia has painfully had to learn this lesson after losing tremendous amounts of material and equipment in a folly of trying to overtake and invade a population that is actively hostile. Anyway, guys, that is all I had. I wanted this to be a quick one. I hope you guys learned something. I hope you gained a little bit of insight. Definitely check the Patreon. Thanks to our patrons, Cole Foster, Command Unit, Caffeinated, Jack Flavis, Chris, Dr. Shockhop, Portable Time, Brandon Arbor, Ren, Astro Hunter, and Z1 Joker. You guys make this channel what it is. I'll see you guys in the next one.